Hello, comrades, and welcome back to the Ushanka show. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи. First of all, I would like to thank you for your support of my project, for your nice comments, and your likes. It's greatly appreciated. Today's topic is life of the ordinary Soviet family. I decided if I look back at my life, at life of my parents in the Soviet Union, and trace my steps through the birth in Kiev in 1971, kindergarten, school, university, my parents' work, maybe that insider view will give you better understanding of life in the USSR in 70s and 80s. So everyone say hello to little chubby Serежа, who was born in July 1971 in Kiev, the capital of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. My mother Elena was 23 years old when I was born, and my father Nikolai was 25. My mother was born in 1948 in northern Ukraine, not far away from the border with Russia and Belarus, and my father was born in 1946 in the western part of Ukraine, Zhytomyr region. They met in Kiev in 1969 at some dance party, and they married in 1970. I was born a year later in July 1971. If you're interested in Soviet Union, you should know by now that medical service was free service in Soviet Union, so my parents didn't have to pay anything for my birth. But, of course, everything was done pretty cheap and effective, so my mom didn't have her own room. Actually, in the same room, there were about 10 other ladies, young girls, older women, also giving birth. Another big difference between American way of having a baby and Soviet way, fathers weren't allowed to be in hospital. Actually, we had a special separate building called Roddom, Родильный дом, which is called, like, you can translate it as a birth house, and it was dedicated only to mothers giving birth. There was nothing else going on there but just doctors helping women to give birth to their children. So as I mentioned, my mom stayed in the same room as other 10 or 15 women, and they didn't keep the babies with them. Babies were somewhere in a separate room, and doctors and nurses were bringing them regularly to their mothers to be fed. So they had these little carts they were pushing in the corridors with the babies lined up, and I guess they had some kind of badge, so they knew which room this cart is going and whose baby is there. So my dad couldn't be next to his wife when she was giving birth, and that was a huge shock for me when I was told that I need to be right next to my wife when she was giving birth to our first child here in Michigan. So that was quite a shock. I really didn't think it was a good idea, but after talking to my wife, I realized I had no choice. Of course, I don't remember anything about my stay in that hospital, but my mother told me several interesting stories, which I would like to share with you. And actually, events in that place affected me and my life for extended period of time. I was quite a big, healthy baby. I was first baby that my mom had, and when I was born, I refused to cry, and even spanking didn't help. And my mother said that doctor ended up splashing some cold water at me, and then I started crying and I couldn't stop. Since I was the first baby, my mom had an issue with milk. She just didn't have any milk, so I was a very hungry, angry baby, biting her nipples and screaming. And guess what happened? right next to my mother was a young girl who gave birth to a very small, tiny baby girl, and that baby didn't want to eat a lot, so this lady was suffering because her breasts were full of milk. And here I am next to her, all starving and angry and crying and biting my mom. So my mother, bless her heart, asked for help, and that's how I got Milk Mother. So from being a tiny baby, I already was kissing other ladies' breasts and make her feel better. And I think it's one of the reasons why till this day, anytime when I see a pretty woman with nice large breasts, it's my knees kind of like my legs getting weak and my knees buckle under me, and that's probably came from that experience back in Soviet Union when I was a tiny baby. Now I need to mention that in Soviet Union women had quite generous maternity leave conditions. What I mean is that by law, pregnant woman had 56 days of paid vacation before giving the birth, so it's almost 2 months, and then 56 days after giving the birth, also paid vacation. A total of 4 months was paid vacation to take care of your baby, your maternity leave. And if you had twins or you had some complications during your birth, then that maternity leave could be extended up to 70 days, 70, after giving the birth. Also, if the woman would like to stay and take care of its baby for a longer period of time, they were allowed to extend their maternity leave, but without pay, for up to 1 year, and their place of work was supposed to hold her position for her for that period of time. So that's quite generous terms for maternity leave in Soviet Union, but you need to keep it in mind that all companies were state-owned, so there was no private business owner who would be suffering consequences of high cost of maternity leave. So this concludes my first story about growing up in Soviet Union. I hope you enjoyed the story, and again, thank you very much for your support. And also I would like to thank whoever was so generous and contributed $30 to my channel. It was a very nice surprise. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your support. До свидания. Goodbye. I was born in the USSR, Part 2. Hello comrades, and welcome back to the Ushanka show. Добрый день, товарищи. So, we continue with my story about life in Soviet Union, and after several days, when doctors made sure that me and my mom were feeling good, they let us go. My dad rented a taxi, took a taxi, because it was quite pricey to use taxi in Kiev, so that was one of the rare cases when we used a taxi and brought us home. A couple words about taxis. Of course, as everything else, taxi parks and taxi cars were owned by government, and they usually used Volga 24 cars starting from 1970. That car was produced from 1970 till 1985, replacing Volga 21, the early model. After limo-style car Chaika, which was used only by top brass of Communist Party, Volga was the biggest car manufactured in USSR. It had an engine with 94 horsepower and 24 45cc engine, and it was used extensively as a taxi, being colored in specific yellowish green color, and also for ambulance services. They manufactured a station wagon version of this car, and that car was popular to be used as ambulance. The cost of the ride in taxi was 10 kopecks per kilometer,
So my parents probably had to pay close to 1 ruble to take me home. Now when I say home, I don't mean house, I don't mean apartment. At that time, my parents lived in dorms, so-called общежития. And even after marriage, my dad lived in the boys' dorm and my mom lived in the girls' dorm. So it was a while, only about 3 months after I was born, that they managed to find a room and move together. This is how I arrived to my mom's dorm room, which she shared with 3 other single girls. And for the first couple of months, I slept in my stroller because we didn't have a crib bed then. And after the several months, my mom bribed the manager of the dorm building with the bottle of cognac and begged him to let her move up on the 3rd floor, where unofficially was the family area. So this whole building was actually girl dorms, but since people getting married once in a while, or quite often if you were young, they started moving some families up on the 3rd floor. My mom's dorm building was constructed after World War II using labor of German POWs. It was a solid 3-story high building in a U shape, so it had 2 wings, and each wing, which had 3 stories, had total of 16 rooms and 2 kitchens and 1 bathroom. Now it was a multi-stall bathroom, so several people can use the bathroom at the same time, and the kitchens were big enough to fit 8 ovens, so each family can use at least 1 burner for cooking. So at first, for about 3 months, I lived on the 2nd floor, as I mentioned, sharing the room with my mom and 3 other single girls. And according to my mom, I was quite a popular baby because I was very cute, huge blue eyes, and I was very chubby. So sometimes my mom had to race from room to room trying to find me, because girls were just stealing me from one room to another to play like with a doll. Interesting fact that a guy could visit his girlfriend in a girl's dorm, but they always had a strict person in the entry, and was usually a really mean grandma who would be taking your passport before you can enter the building. And that was a great tool for girls to determine if this guy is single for real or just pretends, because in every Soviet passport we had a page when you had a stamp that it mentioned that you are single or you married. So that was a great tool. As long as the guy enters the building, other girls will come down, and while he's hanging out with his girlfriend, they will check for her if this guy for real single or he is married and just looking for the affair on the side. So after 3 months, my mom begged the manager of the dorms to allow her to move up to the 3rd floor where several families lived, and that's how my family got together. Now they shared the room with another family, so we had a total of 6 people sharing one small room with the dining room table right in the middle, which was shared, and we lived on the left by the window and the other family on the right side of the room. In the middle of the room they stretched the rope and they used a little curtain to block it off, so for privacy or the other reasons. As in many buildings constructed around that time, 40s and 50s, they had only cold water in the building, and because they also didn't have hot water heaters, in order to get hot water for your needs, like to wash dishes or to wash your kid, you had to heat it up in the pots or some other way. Adults were allowed to use showers downstairs in the basement. There was a locked shower room which was open only once a week on Fridays, and that area had hot water, so that's where adults are being washed. As a baby, you're supposed to be washed every day, so my mom had this metal tub, which you can see here in the picture, and that's how I was taking a bath every day for 5 years. We lived in those dorms for a total of 5 years, so since I was a tiny baby till I was a pretty big kid. And as I mentioned, after sleeping in the stroller for about 3 months, my parents got me a little baby crib. And later, my dad had to cut one of the side, to cut a hole in it so I can stick my legs out, because there was no room in the room to put the normal size bed for me. So I was still using baby crib with the hole so my legs can stick out. Of course, when you're a little kid, you don't understand how horrible your life conditions because you have nothing to compare with. So it was kind of fun for me because there were a lot of kids around, so we always had someone to play with. I'll be running around the building, up and down the stairs, and not knowing any better that some people lived in their own apartments with their own bathrooms. In this case, it was shared bathrooms and shared kitchens where people have to work around each other so both families can, or all the families can cook the meal and do the dishes and do the other chores. The clothing had to be dried outside. Of course, we didn't have washers and dryers. Everything was washed by hand. And then women would hang their clothes up on the balconies or outside, where they had a special poles set up just like Amish people. So after about 6 months, my mom took me to the nursery, so-called детские ясли, which were for kids from 2 months old up to 3-year-old. And later, when I turned 3-year-old, I moved to kindergarten, детский сад, which was for the kids from 3 to 7-year-old. But that will be the next story. Thank you, and we'll see you soon for I Was Born in the USSR, Part 3. I Was Born in the USSR, Part 3. Hello comrades, and welcome back to the Ushanka show. We're going to continue our journey through 1970s, life in Kiev, Ukraine, former Soviet Union. Right now, little Seryoja running up and down the stairs, happy as a clam, and his young parents working 2 jobs, trying to figure out how to get to the next level and get their own apartment. After the last video, I received a question about how did the system work, how the people were supposed to get apartments if you couldn't purchase one. Well, in order to get an apartment for free, you had to get a job at the factory or some other place and sign up on a waiting list, which could be from 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 years, depending on the place of your work. So when people were looking for jobs back then in Soviet Union, they didn't really care much about how much they get paid, because pretty much it was very similar pay across the board, around 100 to 150 rubles. But some places had a shorter list, waiting list for the apartment, so that's the place that you want to work for. I remember my mom telling me a story. After arrival to Kiev from her village from northern Ukraine, she found a brick factory that had only 5 years on the waiting list to get an apartment. So she was very excited, but she was told that she will have to work night shifts, 12-hour night shifts, making bricks at this factory. And she managed to handle only one night shift, and that didn't work really well for her. She realized this job was way too hard, way too dangerous. It was pretty much manual labor, hauling hot bricks all night long non-stop, and she quit the next morning. So my mother switched several jobs. She worked for a while in the kitchen at the kindergarten, and it was a nice and easy job. All you do is just cook for kids, and of course you have some free food, but there was no waiting list period. I mean, you couldn't get apartment working for kindergarten. So she ended up working for the construction company. And still, for 5 years, was no progress at all on the waiting list. And I was growing tall, and as I mentioned in my previous video, my father ended up cutting the hole in my baby crib so I have enough room for my legs. And my mom grew so desperate, so she ended up asking for the meeting with the boss of that construction company, which, still state-owned company. And she just broke in tears and describing the desperate condition of our family, and submitted the paper, заявление, like request for the apartment, and miracle happened. In 1976, we got our own tiny apartment called Gostinka. It's like a studio apartment, really small, with tiny kitchen and tiny bathroom, but that was a huge improvement comparing with sharing the room with another family in the dorms. It was a brand new construction, 9-story high building with about 20 apartments on every level. And I remember that we came to check it out, our new apartment, and by mistake we went to the wrong door, and we looked at this beautiful, nice, big apartment with the balcony, and we all were so excited just to find out about half an hour later that actually our apartment is across the hallway, and it's way smaller and has no balcony. But still, we were super excited. Apartment was on the first floor, which was okay, and it was a nice, quiet location, not far away from our original dorms. So thanks to my mom's persistence, we moved pretty quickly because many families were staying in the dorms for over 10 years, and we ended up moving out in just 5 years. At that time, my parents purchased their first big item for their family. It was the brand new refrigerator Dnieper 2, which looks now to me like tiny fridge, but that thing still works. We still use it almost 50 years later. We never had any issues with it. It was just nice, well-built, small refrigerator, which we moved from one place to another. In late May of 1972, I had my very first big trip. My family went up north to the village where my mom was from originally and where my grandparents lived. We helped them. Well, my parents did. I didn't help at all because I was only like 9 months old. But my parents helped them to plant potatoes, which is always a big deal. It's a lot of hard manual labor to prepare the fields and plant potatoes. And after that, my mom stayed with me in the village for a couple of weeks. And then she left me with her parents, with my grandpa, Maria, and my grandfather, Sergei. And I spent there the whole summer with my mom and my dad coming to visit every 2 weeks or so. My grandma was retired by then, and she took care of me, although, as you may know, in Soviet Union they didn't have diapers, and my grandma really didn't want to bother with paper, it's not a paper, with the cloth diapers, so she just made, I call it Russian diaper. She just cut the hole on the bottom of my pants, and this is how I was playing outside, chasing chickens, and doing my business through the hole in my pants. And I'll tell you more about my grandparents and their story, but will be my next video. Thank you. I was born in the USSR, Part 4. Hello, comrades, and welcome back to the Ushanka show. So right now, little Serozha is crawling around the yard under supervision of his grandma, and in fact, I learned to walk in the village. Many years later, my grandma told me this story, how that happened. Her and her friend were sitting on the bench outside waiting for the cows come home. For real, waiting for their cows to come home. And I was crawling around, and then suddenly I helped myself. I got up and made my very first step. Then another step, and another one. When my grandma saw that, she quickly got up, ran in the house, grabbed the knife, came back, and carefully moved the knife between my legs, cutting the imaginary ropes that were keeping my legs from walking. That's how the old timers, old people, were helping little kids start walking, by catching that very first step and cutting those imaginary ropes. And since then, I started walking and running around the yard. But let's pause for a minute and step back and take a look, trying to understand why my mother, as well as my father, as well as many other young people, in fact millions of young people, were leaving the villages behind, moving to the big cities. As I mentioned earlier, my dad was born in 1946 and my mother was born in 1948, so they were the first generation of baby boomers in post-war Soviet Union. And at that time, peasants had a really tough life in the Soviet Union. They had no passports, they had no vacations, no pensions. Government taxed them really heavily, extracting food and money.
For example, if you had a cow, you were supposed to give the government around 200 liters of milk per year, free of charge. If you had a pig, you're also supposed to contribute around 40 kilograms of meat per year. Now, peasants or collective farm workers at that time, because everyone had to work at the collective farm, kolkhoz, they weren't being paid with money, they were paid with produce like fruits, vegetables, potatoes, and those payments were also taxed. And every man was supposed to work for 200 days for free at the collective farm, and women 150 days a year for free. And so it was, you work all day and for just a little check mark in your workbook. Later, I'm planning to make a dedicated video about life of kolkhoz workers in the Soviet Union, but right now I just want to give you like general idea how bad was the life in the Soviet countryside. The Soviet countryside, via kolkhoz systems, workers were milked to death, taxed to death. They were not allowed to travel anywhere because they weren't issued passports till 1970s. So they actually were very similar to slave labor. And of course, if it was possible, parents were trying to push kids out of the villages to move to the cities because life was there way better. And I remember my mom telling me how Grandma Maria was forcing her to, after finishing high school, the 10th year of school, to move to Kiev, capital of Ukraine, where her older brother lived for a while, and said Grandma told her, there's nothing here for you in the village, you're gonna have a miserable life, you need to move out as quick as possible and start new life in a big city. So year after year, parents in the villages all over the Soviet Union were pushing their kids out of the villages to move to the cities and towns, and the result was that 50 years later all that countryside started dying out. And if you watch my video that I made several months ago when I walked through the abandoned village where my grandparents used to live, that's the final result, when year after year 90% of kids were abandoning villages and moving into the cities. 50 years later, after parents died,
there would be no one to replace them, and houses were standing abandoned and empty because everyone was living in the cities. My grandparents lived in 2-room, not 2-bedroom, just 2-room log cabin, which had a heavy cement roof tiles. They had a couple of small barns. They had 1 cow and usually 1 or 2 pigs, quite a few chickens, and years prior they used to have geese, but in 70s and early 80s they quit geese, just had chickens. They had approximately 1 acre of land to grow their harvest. It was like their private lot, but it was still owned by the government, and that's the size of the lot that was allowed for kolkhoznik worker to own and grow their things, and anything you grow on it was taxed. For example, if you had an apple tree or cherry tree, you were supposed to pay some money to have a tree on your land. So sometimes people weren't planting anything like tree-wise because it was expensive to have. Regardless, you have crop or you don't have crop that year, you still have to pay tax to the government. They didn't have a horse, actually. I'm not sure why, but they weren't allowed to have horses. Horses only were at the collective farm. They had tractors and horses. Even in 70s and 80s, they still use horses quite extensively. So in the springtime, there'll be a waiting line of people to borrow a horse from collective farm so they can plow their gardens and start planting potatoes. So except plowing with the horse, everything else was done by hand. Planting potatoes, digging potatoes out, weeding, and other things, everything was done by hand. So after working at the collective farm all day, my grandparents would come home and start working on their own land. And then they had to milk the cow, feed the pigs, feed the chickens, and start all over again at 5 a.m. next morning, feeding the pig, letting the cow out, and then going back to work. So the life of the Soviet kolkhoznik was really tough, and no wonder that people didn't live long. My grandparents both passed away in early 80s in the age of 71 and 72. Their lifestyle was actually very similar to Amish people, except they did have electricity, but they didn't have a refrigerator, and they stored their food in a cellar. They didn't have a stove, like gas or electric stove, so everything had to be cooked in the wood brick stove, which was also used in the winter for heating the house, burning the firewood, or they cooked outside. And of course they didn't have indoor plumbing. You had to go and get the water out of kolodets, some kind of like a well, which is several households were sharing, and you had to go and wash in a river in the summer, or in your house using a bucket, and also you had outhouse. Despite all that, my best memories of my life is my summer months in the village with my grandparents. I had a great time. I had a lot of friends, kids who also were coming from cities to stay with grandparents for the summer. And the location of the village was really nice. We had a river close by and a forest, so we can go mushroom hunting in the summer, fishing and swimming. So we had a lot of fun being kids over there. Also, I loved my grandparents' stories about their life, especially my grandpa's story about World War II and how he became a prisoner of war and spent 4 years in Germany. But that's the topic for the next video. Thank you. Goodbye. I was born in the USSR, Part 5.
Hello comrades, and welcome back to the Ushanka show. Today I would like to tell you a little bit more about my grandparents on my mother's side that lived in the northern Ukraine, Chernigov region. My grandpa Sergei Yefimovich and my grandmother Maria Ivanovna, they were both born in 1907 in the summer, and they had a little bit different backgrounds. My grandpa Sergei was born in the family of wealthy farmers, and wealthy in terms of life in Russia and Ukraine. They probably had a couple of horses, a small farm. But my grandma Maria, her mother passed away while giving her birth, and at the age of 5 her father died from the farm accident. Something happened, I don't remember what, but he I think was trampled by the horse while harvesting. So she was raised by her relatives, and she was very poor. They met sometimes around 1920s, probably middle of 20s, so they were about 20-year-old or something like that, at someone else's wedding. My grandpa was best friend, and she was a best friend on the bride's side, and that's how he saw her. My grandma Maria Ivanovna was extremely pretty, and he fell in love, and in a year or so he married her. They had a son, my uncle Mikhail, around same time, around the middle of maybe in beginning of 30s. And it's just Ukraine, a rich agricultural region. People were having good crops of potatoes and wheat, raised pigs and cows. So everything would be great, but unfortunately in 1927 Soviet government decided to start so-called collectivization, collectivizация, which was the plan to unite small farmers and the big collective farms, so-called kolkhoz, and also Soviet farms, sovkhoz, and that way to increase agricultural production and help to finance massive industrialization. In 1932, collectivization came to Ukraine. Now, if you study history of Russian Revolution of 1917, there were several slogans that Bolsheviks were using, trying to attract support from the population. They had a slogan like "Заводы рабочим," so all the factories should be owned by workers, "Земля крестьянам," all the land to peasants, so the peasants should be owning the land, and peace for soldiers. So that means that we're gonna stop imperialistic war and start a peaceful building of new society. And in the end, there were the peasants who got the shortest end of the stick, because promising land to peasants, Soviets didn't really mean that every peasant would get land to farm on. The plan was to take everyone's land and combine it into collective farms, and that's where you can work. Collectivization came to Ukraine around 1932. I remember my grandpa's stories about how peasants were given two choices. You can bring your animals to collective farm and join the collective farm, or we'll take your animals and we'll send you to Siberia. So my grandpa ended up joining the collective farm. Now, before the revolution, Russia used to be a breadbasket of Europe. They were selling a lot of wheat, cereals, and other farm products to Western Europe. But after collectivization happened in Soviet Russia, suddenly we had a horrible shortage of food. Collective farms, kolkhozy, turn out to be extremely ineffective because, well, it's hard to convince somebody to work hard if they demand them to work for free and give away all the fruits of your labor. So the government ended up sending troops to the villages to confiscate the wheat, grains, anything they could find. They were taking everything, including the seeds for the next season. And even Ukraine, which has one of the best soil for growing crops, had a horrible hunger issue, and millions of Ukrainians perished in 1930s because all the food was taken away by Bolsheviks. Now, in my grandparents' village, no one died because people lived close to the river and to the woods, so they were mushroom hunting and fishing, and it helped them to survive without bread. And I remember my grandpa's story that he worked as a guard at the barn where there was the grain stored. So him and his brother were guarding the barn, and while one guy would be walking around with the rifle, his brother or my grandpa would go under the barn because barns were built on the big brick pillars, which help to prevent from mice to get inside of the barn and eat the grains. So my grandpa would sneak under the barn and drill a tiny hole right under the spot where the grain is stored, and then that's where they would be quietly stealing grain. Then they put the wood peg in the hole to conceal that hole. So besides confiscating food from the people, government also forbade do things like fishing. Since everything was government owned, now government could tell you what can you do, you cannot do, and they didn't sell like fishing licenses. It's just fishing was forbidden. And sometimes it makes me wonder like why they created such policies, which pretty much was starving people on purpose. So what my grandparents did, and at that time my late uncle Misha was maybe like 3 or 4 year old baby, so they will go fishing at night. They will put Misha to sleep, and while he's asleep, my grandma would tie a rope to his leg and then to the bed leg. So in case if he wakes up in the middle of the night and finds no one home, that he won't wander out of the house and go to neighbors asking, do you know where my parents are? So that's how they made sure that the kid stays in the house by tying his leg to the bed with the rope, and there they go fishing. And at night, there was fishing with the fishing nets. So my grandpa will be on his boat using oar and dragging the net from the boat, while my grandma will be walking along the shore in the water like waist deep, sometimes deeper, up to your neck, dragging the net that way. And this way they'll be dragging the net in the middle of the night up and down the stream, trying to catch some fish so they can have something to eat tomorrow. So that's how the life went in the villages of Soviet Union. Government was stealing from peasants, then peasants were stealing back from the government. Meanwhile, everyone was showing how much they're excited about building communism. But at least no one died from starvation in our village up north. And a lot of it depends, of course, on the collective farm leader, so-called председатель колхоза. If he would be a real communist and constantly checking the people's houses with soldiers
then of course they can keep on confiscating all the food they can find, and people have a hard time. But I guess in our village, a guy was pretty laid back, and he didn't give a hard time to the other neighbors in the village. So that's how life of my grandparents was going in 1930s, and then in June of 1941, Germany attacked Soviet Union, and there was a totally different story after that. But that'll be the topic of my next video. Thank you very much. Hello comrades, and welcome back to the Ushanka show. Today we're gonna talk about moonshining in Soviet Union and how I participated in that business. But first of all, I would like to say a special thanks to Craig from Wisconsin, who is my very first subscriber using Patreon service and helping to develop this channel. As you may aware or maybe not, YouTube drastically changed their advertising policies, and a lot of YouTubers noticed their income dropping quite drastically. And for example, my last video I made about World War II and my grandfather, since I used the words war and POW, YouTube refused to monetize my video, which means it's basically not going to produce any money whatsoever. So if you would like to support this channel, you can do it using patreon.com/Sputnikov, and I'll put the link below this video. Before I start telling you a story about moonshining in Soviet Union and my moonshining, I would like to teach you a new Russian word, and this word is samagon. It's translated as moonshine, but direct translation is a little bit different. Moonshining is because, as far as I know, since people are making illegal alcohol while moon was shining, that's my understanding why it's called moonshine. Samagon means like self-made, pretty much. So samagon is moonshining on Russian. When I was preparing for this video, I was kind of surprised to discover that Soviet Union was actually 1 year ahead of United States to introduce prohibition. According to Wikipedia, prohibition in the United States remained in place from 1920 to 1933, and that's nationwide constitutional ban on production, importation, transportation, and self-alcoholic beverages. In USSR, Comrade Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, signed the law, they call it Decret, in 1919, 1 year earlier, and that law was in place till 1923, when was introduced a state monopoly for production and sales of alcohol. A year later, in 1924, the new law was introduced, where for moonshining you could get up to 5 years in jail with all your belongings being confiscated. And if to compare, for murder, that time in Soviet Union, max term was 10 years. So that's pretty strict law for moonshining. Also, there was introduced a system of bonuses for cops, which used to be called militia, milizioneri. So for every discovered moonshining device, they were getting a special bonus. So in 1923, they discovered around 115,000 moonshining devices. 1924, another 135,000. After the World War II, in 1948, Soviet Union made its laws way stricter against moonshining, and it was a criminal offense that you can get from 2 to 7 years of labor camp. In the same year, 1948, around 52,000 people got arrested. In 1949, 41,000. In 1953, 21,000. So a lot of people got arrested and sent to labor camps, gulags, for moonshining. Only after the death of Joseph Stalin, that trend kind of started slowing down. But then again, the new war against moonshining started in 1958 by Nikita Khrushchev,
even though he was a big, I would say, lover of alcohol. He liked to drink, but he was fighting hard against moonshining. In one of my previous videos, I was talking already about vodka in Soviet Union, and for people in the cities, it was kind of expensive. In 80s, a bottle of vodka was around $3. I mean, 3 rubles. So that's why 3 people could split it easily. Everyone will chip in a ruble, and then you have plenty of alcohol to get drunk, but not too drunk, so you can make it home. But for peasants, for kolkhoznik in the villages, it was expensive, so moonshining was mostly going on in the countryside. And that's where the story of my grandpa starts. As I mentioned in my previous videos, I spent every summer in the village with my grandparents. So my parents will take me in the beginning of June, and I'll stay there all through the summer till beginning of September. And my parents will come maybe in July or August for a month, because they had a vacation, paid vacation for 30 days. It was quite a generous vacation to have in Soviet Union. Everyone had it, 30 paid days, but of course pay was pretty pathetic. But you can take a nice break for 30 days. So when I got a little bit older, maybe 7, 8 years old, I started doing several chores for my grandfather. For example, I would be picking Colorado potato bugs, which we had a lot of those, destroying our potato fields. So my grandpa will pay me 10 kopecks for a mayonnaise jar full of Colorado potatoes bugs. So that was my way of making a little money and help my grandparents. So in the morning I'll grab an empty glass jar, go in the garden and start picking these bugs, pick it full, show grandpa, and he'll pay me $10, and then I'll take a hammer and smash them, all those bugs, and then go back in the garden. Another chore I was doing, I was helping my grandpa to cut firewood. Their log cabin, which all the people pretty much lived in the log cabins, has like usually 2 rooms, and it was heated by wood burning stove, big brick wood burning stove inside of the house. So pretty much all summer project would be to cut firewood by hand, and then when my dad shows up for vacation, one of his projects, his chores, will be chopping the firewood. And so we had this long 2-handle saw, hand saw. So I'll be on one end helping grandpa. I mean, I was a little kid, but at least I could help a little bit and keep the saw straight. So we'll be cutting that wood and stacking it up, and so my dad can chop it later. But sometimes I'll get very excited when I notice that grandpa will start cutting firewood in way smaller pieces. So usually it was the standard length which would go into wood burning stove. But if my grandpa decides it's time to make some moonshine, he will make it way shorter, because the little burjuika, so-called little metal wood burning stove that been used for moonshining, you couldn't fit the big logs, so he would start cutting smaller ones, and I'll be getting excited because I knew we have another moonshine project coming up. Now my grandparents, they use dried fruits like dried apples and pears to make a mash. People used all kind of different things. They used sugar beets. Some people used potatoes. In Poland, I know potato vodka was very popular. Sugar beets made kind of nasty. Samagon, it was really like almost blue color. So as I said, apples. Some people use candy. Then, for example, if you had jams and jelly that got spoiled, instead of throw them away, you can create mash and make vodka of it. But my grandpa was using dry fruits. And I remember our neighbor, we had a single lady in her 60s who was a horrible alcoholic. And she was also making her own moonshine, but she never could make it to the end because while mash is getting ready, and it's getting like light alcoholic, she won't be able to wait, and she will start slurping that mash and getting drunk on it. And sometimes she'll be so desperate to get drunk, so she will try to sneak to the other people's barns, trying to find their mash and eat it up to get drunk. So my grandpa was always keeping an eye on her, make sure she won't mess with our mash. And of course, as I mentioned, making samagon, making moonshine was illegal. So, for a little kid, it was kind of exciting, kind of this dangerous thing that I'm doing. And we had only one police officer in the village, and it was like part-time because there was no crime going on in the village at all. So it was a low-risk activity, but still, somebody can report on you. So when the day comes, we'll be moonshining inside of the barn, and my job will be watching the temperature, because you have this big container with mash, and then you have a copper pipe that spirals and goes through another bucket that's full of water. And my job was to feel with my finger the temperature of the water and keep it cold so condensation will be going. So I'll have a couple of buckets with cold water from the well, and I'll be taking out some warm water and adding cold water to get condensation going. And it was almost like a magic, you get the things going, get the water set up, get the fire going, and suddenly there'll be alcohol start dripping, moonshine start dripping from the tip of the copper line. And my grandpa will always make this cool test. He will take a little teaspoon, fill it up with this fresh first run moonshine, and then he will lit the match and set the moonshine on fire, and it will get this cool blue flame burning, and he will look at me and says, yeah, this is a good stuff. So the first run, so-called первак, which means like the first, that'll be the strongest, of course, alcohol, and then while you moonshining, it'll be getting weaker and weaker. And we'll get usually maybe several gallons of vodka, of samagon, which my grandpa then will be slowly drinking. He wasn't drinking much at all, but he always would have a little shot of his moonshine before every meal. So in the morning, he have a little shot like 15 grams, then at lunch, then at dinner. Also in our village, we had this little area, it was like a separate street they call hutar, which kind of was famous that everyone was moonshining there, and there's a lot of people who lived there were the hardcore drunks. So that place always had trouble with fires, because people will be moonshining and drinking moonshine while they're making it and getting wasted and falling asleep, and then place will catch fire. So they had fires quite often in that area. It was famous for burning places down by drunk moonshiners. Now, for people who were moonshining in the cities, the whole process was quite easier, because you had to run in cold water, so you didn't need to constantly drain hot water, add it cold water. You just turn the cold water on, and we're constantly running through the condenser and condensing the alcohol. And you didn't need the firewood, because you just set up the whole system on the top of your gas stove. And I remember only once my grandparents were moonshining in our apartment. I don't remember why they decided to do it, because in Kiev, making 130, 150 rubles a month and paying 3 rubles for a bottle of vodka, which is half liter, wasn't too bad. So this is my story about the moonshine in Soviet Union. I was part of it, and it was actually a really cool thing to do. And as I said, it's really awesome thing. I still remember that blue flame of that first round of the moonshine of samagon, and how cool it was. And actually, I forgot to mention, when I was maybe 5 years old, when I was in the village, of course, I had a horrible tooth pain. It just was horrible toothache. And my grandma, she didn't have any pills, and we didn't have, of course, dentists in that village. So in order to help me out, it was late night and I was tired and sleepy. She gave me a little tablespoon of samagon and told me just to flush your mouth to kill that whatever was bothering me. So I did that, and then I kind of like looking at her, I was like, what do I do now? And she said, well, go ahead and swallow it. So I actually first tried vodka when I was like 5 years old, so that was pretty funny. Well, so that's the end of my story. I hope you enjoyed the show. As always, you can like the video, you can share with your friends, and you can support it by signing up on patreon.com. Thank you very much. Hello, comrades, and welcome back to the Ushanka show. Today I would like to change gears a little bit and go back to story time and tell you another story about my life as a little kid. And there were some funny events happened to me when I was a little kid, and kind of interesting. I still remember quite clearly those things, although sometimes I don't recall what happened to me a couple months ago, but I still remember really well what happened to me when I was like probably 4 or 3 years old. So if you were watching my channel for a while, you should know by now that every summer my parents would take me to the village in the northern Ukraine where my grandparents lived, parents of my mother. So I was born in 1971, so since 1972 I was there every summer from early June to the late August, spending time with my grandma Maria and my grandfather Sergey. He had the same first name as me. And one of the things I remember, besides I really enjoyed being out in the country, running around, I had a couple of friends. My grandpa was a fisherman. And it wasn't really his hobby. He fished, to get fish to eat. And he wasn't using fishing poles or anything like that. His tools were fishing nets and also this kind of funny looking devices that's called neret on Russian. So you set up those fish traps in the little lakes or little streams by the river, and then you come back half day later to check and get the fish. As other guys in that village and surrounding villages, my grandfather owned a small flat bottom wooden boat like on this picture, and it's always handmade. We had a guy in our village who was really good at making those boats, and of course every fall when fishing is done, these boats will be dragged out on the shore, flipped upside down, and then in the spring people will take them back to their homes, and then you have to apply molten tar on the cracks of the boat so it doesn't leak, and then you take it back to the river. You understand, if the bottom is flat and you turn the boat against the wind, the small waves will be making flapping noise like this to the bottom of the boat. So one time I was in the boat with my grandpa, and of course you use the paddle. No one had a motorboat, everyone you were using a single paddle. I heard this noise of the waves crashing, small waves crashing at the bottom of the boat, and I asked grandfather about that noise, and he told me that it was actually a fish hitting the bottom with their tails. So I got very excited, and that was my thing. Every time I go with him, I'll stick my little hand under the boat and I try to snatch that fish that keep on slapping its tail against the bottom, and of course I never caught anything, and my grandpa was quietly chuckling behind me. And only quite a few years later it dawned on me
that my grandpa was joking and there's no fish under the boat, it's just the silly waves hitting the boat. Also, my grandfather, as I said, he was fishing a lot, but he didn't know how to swim. So in order to be safe with his little grandkid, every time we go on the boat, he will tie a rope to my leg and then has the rope by himself. So in case I fall off the boat, he will just snatch the rope and pull me back into the boat. One of my, I think, earliest memories I ever have, and I was pretty young because what I did was pretty stupid. There was one sunny morning, and I woke up, had breakfast, and went outside to play. And I remember that was a nice sunny day. And when I was in the village, if the weather was nice, I was barefoot all day long. So most of the summer I'll be just running outside barefoot, and that was the day when it was a nice day, so I was barefoot. And most people in the villages had one cow, and the way it was arranged that every day two families will supply a person to watch the cows. So the whole herd, like 50 cows or so, and people will take turns to watch this herd. So once every month maybe, or every 2 months, it'll be your turn to watch the cows. So like my grandmother will wake up, I would say about 5:30 in the morning. She will milk the cow, then takes the cow outside. There'll be like a field where all the cows are being gathered, and there'll be these two people that will be watching the cows for the rest of the day. And I don't know how you guys familiar with cows, but of course cows also they poop, right? Well, they poop two ways. A cow can just poop while it's walking, so you just lift the tail and just start taking a dump. So the way the poop lands on the ground, it look like a little pancakes. I'm sorry about this description, but in order to understand the story, I have to tell you all that. So this happens when the cow walks while pooping. Another story, if the cow will be standing in one spot, then there'll be a big pile of cow manure, which look like a big cake, right? So that morning I went outside and I said they gather cows around 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and I was up probably around 9 a.m. or 10 a.m., and it was a nice sunny day. So right outside our there's a fence in the door, so I opened the door, walk outside on the street, and there was a dirt street. I see this beautiful, I don't know if I can use the word beautiful. It was a big cake of a cow manure. So there was a cow standing there and they pooped. So there was a big fat pile of cow poop. And sun was baking it already, so the top actually was a crust. And I got curious, I'm kind of touching with my foot gently the top of the crust, and I was like, wow, that thing feels hard. Probably I can just stand on it and nothing will happen. So silly me, being a little kid, being barefoot, I stepped on the top of that cow pile, and of course it broke off and my foot went inside and this liquid poop came out. So in horror I pulled my leg out and it's all nasty, covered with poop. So I turned around and I raced back home crying. So that kind of forever stayed in my memories, that horrible event, because I was so curious to explore how hard the cow pile can be, and I failed. And of course grandma then stopped me from running inside the house because I had poop all over my leg, and she helped me to wash it off. But that was one of the disturbing events that happened to me as a little kid that I try to step in a cow manure thinking it can hold me. And also there's another interesting story I already mentioned before in one of my videos, that is my grandpa was making moonshine like most people in the villages. And when I got older, I was helping him to chop wood and then help actually moonshining. But when I was younger, I actually tried moonshine when I was very young. And what happened, I had a really horrible toothache. And my grandparents didn't have any pain killers, any pills to help me out. So grandma gave me a small shot of moonshine to wash my mouth. So I used like a mouthwash, hoping that alcohol will kill whatever was bothering my tooth. So I was flushed my mouth with this moonshine, and of course I tasted, so it's really like bitter, burning my tongue. And then I asked grandma like, what do I do with it? And she's just like, go ahead, swallow and go to bed. So it helped me, but so I knew that alcohol is really bitter taste. So it kind of this young kid logic, like anything which bitter and sharp in flavor, it makes people drunk. Because by that time I saw people drunk, and I heard they drank too much vodka. So this logic of everything bitter will make you drunk, I decided to feed chickens. Of course, my grandparents had maybe like 6 or 7 chickens. I decided I'll make grandparents' chickens drunk. So of course, what kind of bitter stuff you can find in the village? Well, if you go to the garden, you can harvest green onions. So that's what I did. I went to the garden and I ripped a bunch of onion tops, took it to the kitchen coop, and I started feeding chickens. And my expectation was that after chickens eat a bunch of onions, they'll start staggering around, fall, acting like a drunk person does. So chickens were really happy. They ate all the onions, and then I'm standing there waiting, all excited because it'll be such a funny thing to watch drunk chickens. But nothing happened. So I decided, well, maybe it's not enough. So I ran back to the garden, got more onion tops, came back. I fed the chickens again and waited for a long time, and nothing happened again. Chickens weren't acting drunk at all. And I was really disappointed because I was so excited, like, hey, it'd be so funny to watch chickens wander around and and bump into each other and tip over and fall. But unfortunately, nothing like that happened. So that my experiment of making chickens drunk failed miserably. And the last story was kind of I got my grandparents in trouble. My grandfather Sergei, he had a younger brother Vasily, and they both participated in World War II. I already told a story about my grandfather during the war. So they both survived, and brother of my grandfather, so it'll be like my grand uncle maybe, right? He didn't have really good marriage. I'm not sure, don't remember what was the problem, but my grandparents thought that she was really a mean lady. So one time they were talking about my grand uncle Vasily, and what happened, I don't know how many years prior, he committed suicide. He just couldn't handle life anymore, so he went to his barn and hanged himself. So my grandmother and my grandpa were talking about it. Somehow the topic came up and just discussing and blaming his wife, ex-wife, for this problem, that she was mean to him and didn't feed him right and treat him badly. And I said, I was a little kid, so I was just quietly sitting listening, but I had really good memory. And of course, how the things happen. Next day or couple days later, I was walking back home from my friends after I was done playing, and this lady was riding a horse buggy. People weren't allowed to have horses in the Soviet Union. They only could borrow it from the collective farm. So she needed to transport something, I'm not sure what. So she had a horse buggy and riding it home, and then she saw me walking home, and we lived pretty close, so she offered me a ride, and of course any kid would like to have a ride on a horse buggy. So I hopped next to her, and then I hit play in my head and I gave her hell. I told her how mean she was, and that's because of her my grand uncle Vasily hanged himself, and you lady are so mean and no one likes you. So I told her everything. Like, I'm apparently memorized all that conversation between my grandparents. So you can imagine that lady stormed into our house, and she was not happy. Yeah. She yelled at my grandparents, and that was really embarrassing. You know, there are some conversations you want to just keep in the family, and my grandparents look at me and they realize that they need to be really careful around me, because my grandfather said, like, wow, he's just a tape recorder. He remembered every single word we said, and he told everything we said to that lady. So that was that kind of embarrassing moment that I kind of set up my grandparents unwillingly. So there's the end of my story time. I hope you enjoyed the story, and we'll be making more videos. So thank you very much for your support and for your love to my channels. Don't forget to put likes and share this video with your friends. Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи. В эфире программа Ushanka Show. My name is Sergey, and I was born in the USSR. Today, I would like to share with you some of my personal experiences, some of my happiest moments in my Soviet childhood. So here we go. 10 happy moments of my Soviet childhood. 10 радостных моментов моей советской жизни. So during the winter months, ice hockey was very popular among kids. So you'll get enough kids to make 2 teams. You find a good spot to play, and you just play hockey hour after hour. We didn't use skates, so usually they'll be part of the plowed road that just kind of has a packed snow, so it's slippery enough. It's almost ice, but it's not ice. So you have a snow banks on each side, and you just run back and forth along that stretch, and you play ice hockey with your friends. So of course every kid would bring his own hockey stick, and I was very cool because my father one time painted a bus of the local hockey team, Sokol Kiev, Hawk, the Hawks, I guess will be translation proper. And as the souvenir, they gave him a Golly hockey stick, that big wide one. I was the only one in our building who had that one, so I was very, very cool. And of course, if you play hockey, besides hockey stick, you also need a hockey puck. And so every kid will bring his own or couple, but in order not to mix it up or lose it, everyone will use tiny like shoe nails and will nail your name. So you have a letter, maybe A for Alex or S for Sergey. So every kid would have like a personalized hockey puck in case, if you lose it, then you can find it and say, hey, I found yours and let's find mine. And of course, as I said, you play along the snowbank, so quite often the hockey puck will go in the snow so deep that we won't be able to find it. And in the course of winter, we would lose quite a few hockey pucks. So one time, so that was during the spring, it was the very first of very warm day and snow was melting everywhere. And at that time, I was going to school on a second shift. So because they had too many kids for that specific school,
they had half of the kids had to go to school at 2 p.m. and study till 6 p.m., which I hated, but at least you could sleep in the morning. So I went to play outside, and I was by myself because everyone else was in school. And I went for a walk, and that area when we played hockey all winter long, all the snow melted, those big snowbanks disappeared, and guess what I saw? There were like a dozen or even more hockey pucks sticking out from the melting snow, like all over that area, and that was so cool. That was like this weird mushroom hunting in the spring, so I had to go and get a big bag and collected all the hockey pucks, and later, of course, I gave back to my friends the one I could identify, and the ones that had no markings, I kept them all. It was a happy morning. And speaking of mushrooms, I would say грибы in Russian. My number 2 happy moment was related to the mushroom hunting or mushroom picking. I was very small, probably 6-year-old, maybe 7, and we were mushroom hunting with my mother and my dad. And usually, you don't walk together, you kind of spread a little bit so you can cover bigger area or larger area to find more mushrooms. And I walk up into this opening area, and there was like a whole bunch of поддубники, this interesting kind of mushroom. And I got so happy, I got on my knees, got my little pocket knife, and I started just cutting them down, harvesting them. And then suddenly I realized I don't hear my parents. So one minute I was so happy, and next moment I was scared, and I actually started crying and yelling, "Ow, ow, papa, mama," because I realized they just were keep on walking and didn't pay attention that I stayed behind. And fortunately they found me, but I was sitting there with my bag full of mushrooms, and my face was all covered with tears. But still, it was a happy moment. Number 3, my happy banana moment. Of course, for those who watch my videos for a while, or if they purchased my book American Diaries 1995, I shared that story already. It's about receiving a parcel with bananas from my parents. So that was another happy moment of my childhood. Bananas were available only for the short period of time in the summer, only in the big cities, and since my birthday was in July and every time in the summer I was in the village, that was kind of our little family tradition. My parents will get in line and purchase a couple of kilos of bananas, and they were pretty pricey, I believe like 6 rubles per kilogram, and then they shipped the parcel to village as the birthday present. So I still remember that one time that me and my friend went to receive the parcel at the post office, and it's like 2 kilometers walk. And I remember I was so happy carrying that box back home and putting my nose to the gap between the boards, and I could smell ripe bananas. And it was so much excitement about it. Of course, later we got caught by rain and everything else, but that moment of carrying this heavy parcel full of ripe bananas, it was awesome. Number 4, watching fallen stars and the satellites. Looking back, most of my happy childhood moments were related to the summertime. And of course, since I spent my summer break in the village, it's all together. So it's always village, it's always summer. That's when I was happy. Not many super happy moments back in Kiev. So this is probably was late August. So after wheat, pshenica was harvested by combines, they didn't roll the straw into these big giant rolls like they do it now, or they used to do forever in America, I guess. The combine will be just harvesting wheat and then just dumping these little piles of straw, and tractors will pick it up and they'll make this long, tall pile of straw that we call skirda. So what we did quite a few times is to go late evening when it's getting dark, because you probably could get in trouble if the collective farm workers will notice that you climb up that pile and you tumble straw down. Maybe they won't care, but we didn't take chances. So when it gets dark, we'll gather together, me and my buddies, and we would climb on that
pile. We bury ourselves in the straw, which is kind of pokey. And then we just listen to the little portable radio and watch the starry skies. And of course, it's August, so you have a lot of fallen stars. So you have competition, how many fallen stars you're gonna notice. And then of course you see satellites. I don't know if you guys ever watched the sky at night, but you could see satellites moving across the sky. It's like a bright star that's just moving steadily. So we'll have that good time together, chatting, listen to the radio, and then we just fall asleep. And I think once or twice we actually stayed there overnight and just slept all till 5 o'clock in the morning. When it got really chilly, then we went back. So I had a great time. That was just amazing. Just fresh air. It's summer. There's warmth of the straw, sky, stars. It was amazing. Number 5, nerds score. Hey, I was actually wrong. There is one happy moment of my life. It actually happened during the school days. And I believe maybe that was the 7th or 8th grade. So we played basketball during our physical training, PT, or as we call it, Fizkultura. And so we had 2 teams, and of course, like it happened, it was like a nerds versus bad boys, almost like that. And of course, we're just playing, having fun, not really paying attention to rules. But it was a moment when someone really did a really bad foul against me. And I just like, okay, I need to do the free throws. And they all started laughing like, yeah, sure, like you're ever gonna score. And I was so mad because first of all, the guy was so rude and he hurt me. And then they were making fun of me because they don't think I'm gonna score. And so I was very nervous, but I did 2 perfect, we call it, I think, swoosh, right? It just even didn't touch the ring. It just one after another, just blunk, and oh my goodness, that felt good. It was a very, very happy moment. Number 6. This one is, we're going back to the village again. But this one I think is one of my earliest memories that I still kind of remember. And I think I was very young, maybe 5, maybe 4, but probably 5. So I remember I was playing, and I was easy kid for my grandparents because I could keep busy. Like I could stay busy myself. I didn't need to be constantly entertained. So I had this old wooden crate that had a bunch of nails. I think Grandpa, he drove a bunch of little nails to it, and I played like I'm riding a motorcycle, and then I'm moving this bent nail like it's a different gears. So I switch gears and turn around and just playing. Chickens are around, pecking on grass and stuff. So just another day in the village. And the reason why I think I was so young, because when I was so little, of course, I missed my parents a lot. You go to the village for 3 months, and your parents will come for a month, but then you don't see your mom for so long that we had a picture of my parents, and I hated that photo because every time I look at it, it makes me cry, and I was very not happy about it. So I was playing that crate, and suddenly gates open, and my parents walked in. Somehow they came earlier or something, so we didn't know they're coming, and it was such a fantastic surprise. I was so thrilled to see my parents just showing up like that in the village. Like it was, I was just ecstatic with joy. And later, after they left, I started playing this silly game that when I feel that I miss my parents so much that I'm about to cry, I'll go to that crate, I sat on it and start playing the same game again, and start looking at the gate, hoping the gate will open and my parents will show up again, because that was like my good luck, good charm, right? Lucky charm, lucky crate, that if I play on it again, it will make my parents come back. So it was a very happy moment. And then of course my parents didn't return because I wasn't playing with the crate again, but still that was a fun moment. Well, guess what? There's another happy moment from the school days. I have a long list, and I'm just picking the ones that kind of relates to my younger days, my innocent days, let's put it that way. And later, if you guys are interested, I can make another video about my more mature days when I started looking at the girls through a different kind of angle. This is still, I'm very young, very innocent. And anyway, so back to the moment number 7. So in the Soviet schools, life wasn't easy for pupils. We had to go to school 6 days a week, so we studied on Saturdays. And beginning from the fourth grade, we had finals. So in the fourth grade, we had finals in math. So just one test, but it was pretty intense and I was very nervous. I studied a lot, but I was still freaking out because I never had the experience of doing this test. You pull the ticket, so called, and it'll be like 3 questions and you need to go to the blackboard and answer them by memory. And I got the ticket that I knew really well. I nailed it. I got 5, which is excellent, or A. And I remember marching home. I was so happy because I just got that A and I just did so great and I was so proud of myself. It was a very, very happy moment. And it was, of course, all that weight off my shoulders. Number 8, my successful postcard Ponzi scheme. So we still lived in a one-room apartment. So we're talking about 1979, 1980, maybe 1978. So I was already a pupil. I was going to school, and we had this game going, and it's pretty much like a Ponzi scheme. So, and somebody will give you the letter, and it says like you need to find 5 people and write them the same letter, just copy it, and then you add addresses on the bottom. You remove the top address and you mail a postcard. You add your address to the bottom, so you bump everyone up. You send everyone a postcard. You bump the top person off, put yourself on the bottom, and I don't remember how long the list was. Maybe it was more than 5 addresses, and then you send to 5 people. So that's a pyramid, right? So you get a letter sent to 5 people. 5 those letters people send to each of 5 people. So you have 25, and on and on. And eventually your name will get bumped up to the first level, and you're going to get a bunch of postcards, and then you get removed. And guess what? A month or so later, I started having my mailbox was so packed full every single day. We had postcards coming. And usually people, they were practical in the Soviet Union. So they will mail you in a letter, like brand new postcard. So actually you can use this. It'll be different kinds. Some will be, from the different cities with the pictures for that city. Some that will be like New Year postcards. And most of them were never signed. It's just brand new postcard. That was kind of deal. So for many years later on, my family never had to buy any postcards because we had, I think it was close to 400 we got those. So that was really cool. I was very happy because every day I just had this big haul of postcards coming out our mailbox. So that was really neat. Number 9, a package from Germany. So here we're probably talking about 86, 87. So we started having foreign magazines showing up in retail, and you could purchase them. They were very expensive. And one of those magazines was a German youth pop magazine called Bravo. And at that time, I was just so in love with Sandra. There was this pop singer from Germany, Sandra Lauer. And I had a pretty bad crush. I had posters. Well, later I had posters all over the wall, but I had some posters of hers. And I ended up writing a letter to that magazine, the Bravo. So I wrote the letter in English, and it was probably pretty bad English, but I wrote them how much I love the magazine and how much I'm in love with Sandra, and that I paid a lot of money to have this magazine where she was on the cover. And just asking them if they have any more posters available of Sandra for me. And then right by the New Year, like a day or so before the New Year, so it's the biggest holiday for the Soviet people, I found in the mailbox a thick envelope, like package from Bravo from Germany. And it was packed full with Sandra posters, bunch of stickers. And we're talking about times when the Backstreet Boys, I didn't care about those, but there's a tons of, they had a whole set of stickers, but I was care only about Sandra. So I got about 5 or 6 brand new Sandra posters and letter from the magazine that they appreciated. I'm such a huge fan. My goodness, that was happy times. That was a very, very happy New Year. Number 10, the very, very first letter from overseas. So once again, that's around 86, 87. I studied English and I was desperate to find some pen friends, or pen pals they call them, from other countries. And in one of our Soviet youth magazines, they started publishing like addresses of people from other countries to may look for pen pals. I think they were just borrowing them from other magazines, like from Germany or something, or maybe even, I'm trying to think. Anyway, so I received a letter from South Korea and I was so happy. It's just the very first letter. It didn't last long corresponding. Of course, it takes forever for the letters, but we corresponded maybe for a year. It takes like almost 2 months after you send the letter to receive the answer. But I remember that fishing out that first envelope and see this really strange address from South Korea, and it's all typed on a typewriter. That was awesome. I was very, very happy camper. Okay, comrades, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you really liked it, I have another about 20 more happy moments, but a lot of them more like PG-13. So if you think you might want to listen to those stories, just let me know in the comments and I will work on that other video. Otherwise, we'll talk to you soon. Well, hello comrades and welcome back to the Ushanka show. Today we are going bananas, or at least we're going to talk about bananas. But before that, I would like to come back to the previous story about the Whole Foods mislabeling their items and about how Soviet Union had a problem with people cheating on the scales, putting fingers on the scales. And there's a beautiful illustration of how that's being done even right now. Take a look at this video.
Надо пульву. Как у меня больше пришел. Что хотела учить? Что? Я не вижу, как это вам протекать. Так, и 11, 13, 11, 12. Николай, сколько себе понимаешь, какого?
So, did you see how good that lady was with adding that weight of the potato every time she put something on the scale for the customer? This is real professional right there. But today we're going to talk about bananas. You see, in Soviet Union, because we had a central economy and everything was planned by the government, we did not have bananas all the time in the stores. In fact, we had bananas only once a year for about 2-3 weeks. They will show on the shelves of only like big cities. The way the things worked in Soviet Union, we had different levels of supply for the different cities. So for example, the major cities of Russia or Soviet Union, Ukraine, were like level 1. There will be like Moscow, St. Petersburg, maybe Kiev, I'm not sure. So they will get their shelves in the stores will be like, I won't say packed, but they will be the most full shelves in the whole country. So they will get the first grabs on everything. Then it'll be level 2, smaller cities, and level 3, it will be like whatever left that will go to the small towns and villages. So for example, in the small village where I spend every summer, we had bread being delivered only 3 times a week. For the rest of the days, there'll be no bread available. So that was pretty important not to miss the bread day. And grandma will send me way in advance, couple hours prior, bread truck arrival, and you'll stay in the line for an hour or two, wait until the bread gets delivered, then you buy your allotment. Usually it would be based on how many people right now live in the house. That's how many pieces of bread you're gonna get. But we're talking about bananas right now. So Kiev was lucky. It was a capital of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, or right now it's just Ukraine. So Kiev will get some bananas. And that time I would be in the village staying with my grandparents. And my parents knew that I really, really like bananas. You know, it's like when you don't have it all the time, it's like you really like it. So that was their birthday present for me in the summer, because bananas will show up around beginning of July. And I honestly don't know why it was that specific time. Maybe because world prices will be lower in the summer. So the Soviet government will decide to purchase a couple boatloads of bananas from South America or Central America. So they will buy some bananas and then they ship it to me by mail. And that time in Soviet Union we had the standard size crates made out of plywood that were used to mail parcels, right? So they will buy like maybe 3 kilos, and hopefully they were close to 3 kilos of bananas, and ship it to the village, which was about 100 miles or so up north. It's where I stayed with my grandparents. And then a mailman will deliver a notice that, hey, your parcel arrived, you need to go and pick it up. I think that was going on similar way here in the United States. Prior delivering, right now they just drop off boxes right by your front door, even United States Postal Service. And I think like 10 years ago that was kind of similar thing. They'll send bring you the delivery notice, says, hey, you need to go to the post office and pick up your parcel or your package. And that will be my like most exciting day of the summer, because I knew it's around my birthday, middle of July. That means that I'm getting some bananas. And one time we had a pretty interesting adventure happened while we were picking up bananas with my friend. And we lived quite far away from the center of the village, so we had to walk about 2 miles to the post office. We brought the paper, you know, my grandma or grandpa will sign. I'll be my grandpa signing, but because my grandma, she never learned how to read. She lived her whole life and she never went to school, and she, even her old age, she didn't know how to read. So I'll bring this notice to the post office, get my parcel, and we'll be walking that day. You know, it was a beautiful sunny day. We're walking back carrying this heavy box, and I would put my nose right to the, you know, that little gap between the lid and the box, and I could smell bananas, and I was so excited. But you couldn't just open the box because it was literally nailed. The lid would be nailed, and so you have to carry it all the way back home so Grandpa can pry it open for you. So we're walking back to my house, all excited with my friend Dmitry, and then suddenly we heard this rumbling. So we look back, and oh my goodness, out of nowhere, this dark cloud showed up right behind us, and it was catching up with us pretty quick. So that was thunderstorm coming. So we picked up the pace, trying to make it home, but it was obvious that we couldn't make it. So we ended up hiding in this abandoned barn by the collective farm, where all the equipment, you know, tractors, and it was like a big repair shop for the local collective farm. And it was a big barn that they never used anymore. So we ran into it, and it was missing doors, and then the rain started. It was pouring rain, like you guys saying, it was raining cats and dogs, and we say in Russia it was pouring like out of the bucket. And then lightning started, and there was a loud thunderstorm, a loud thunder, and lightning started hitting like pretty close. So that was really scary. And my friend Dmitry said, hey, you know, the ground is so wet, do you understand that we can get killed any moment? Because if the lightning strike close to where we're at, it will come in one of your legs, through your heart, kills you, and out of your other leg, and you're dead. So we both freaked out, and I was like, well, what should we do? She's like, well, the only way to save ourselves, we need to have, for the electricity, not to have a way through our bodies. So we end up lifting one leg and trying to balance and stay, kind of like stay on one leg only. And that was horrible. So there's this pouring rain, there's this lightning, there's a thunder, really scary. Now we're like maybe 8 to 9-year-old kids, and we're like those blue heron birds staying on one leg. And I was like, Dima, I can't do it anymore. My leg hurts. And yeah, so about half an hour we were like hopping from one leg to another, trying to balance and trying to stay alive. And then rain stopped and we made it home all alive and happy. And my grandpa opened the box and oh my goodness, there were these beautiful yellow bananas. And man, I really enjoyed the time, and I kind of miss those days because right now, because bananas available all the time in the grocery stores, I really kind of like lost interest to eat them. Before, that was pretty much, it was like my drugs. To have a banana and the smell of ripe banana was so exciting. Not anymore, unfortunately. When you have something in abundance, you kind of, slowly lose interest to it. I still like bananas, but I don't eat them much. I maybe add them to my cereal, or I really like banana bread that my wife makes, but there's no more. There's excitement and expectation to get bananas for my birthday. This is how I used to go bananas back in Soviet Union. Hope you enjoyed this story. Have a good day. Goodbye.